Republican presidential candidates defend a Marines chokehold, and a new security agreement in the Indo-Pacific. All of that and more today, May 23rd, 2023. Good morning, early birds. I'm Zimone Perez, and this is the Early Bird Brief, produced by Defense News and Military Times. Jonathan is on some well-deserved rest and relaxation this week. First up, the United States made a move to strengthen its ties in the Pacific region on Monday. The United States signed a new security pact with Papua New Guinea. The State Department said that the new agreement provides a framework to help improve security cooperation and regional stability. Papua New Guinea Prime Minister James Marape said the pact is mutually beneficial to both countries.
I just want to stress this point. It wasn't shoved down our throat. It wasn't forced upon us. It was a mutual agreement. Our conversation was held, especially on the need for Papua New Guinea to have our defense force assisted, supported, stepped up.
But the agreement sparked student protests by those worried about the increased militarization of the region. And here's why this matters. This new security pact comes as the U.S. works to offset China's influence in the region. Papua New Guinea is located just north of a U.S. ally, which makes it strategically significant. It has a population of nearly 10 million people, and that makes it the most populous Pacific island nation. Beijing has already invested $400 million in a shopping and apartment complex there. It's part of its ambitious global One Belt, One Road infrastructure project. And last year, the United States was jolted when nearby Solomon Islands signed its own security pact with China. Since then, the U.S. has really increased its focus on the Pacific. They have opened embassies in the Solomon Islands and Tonga, revived the Peace Corps volunteer efforts, and encouraged more business investment. But the United States' efforts to sway Pacific Islands has faced some roadblocks due to the debt ceiling fight back home in Washington. President Joe Biden was supposed to make a historic stop to the country, which would make him the first president to visit any Pacific Island country. Secretary of State Antony Blinken traveled in Biden's place for the ceremony instead.
We mean a region where countries are free to choose their own path and their own partners, where problems will be dealt with openly, transparently, goals will be reached in a transparent way, applied fairly, and goods, ideas, and people can flow freely and lawfully across the land, the seas, the skies, and in cyberspace.
The U.S. has also signed a maritime agreement with Papua New Guinea. That would let the U.S. Coast Guard partner with Papua New Guinea to take aim at illegal fishing and drug smuggling. Another important story, Republican hopefuls vying for president are defending a New York Marine who killed a homeless person after putting him in a chokehold. Daniel Penny is a 24-year-old Marine veteran. He was caught on video pinning an agitated homeless man in New York City to the floor in a chokehold. The passenger was 30-year-old Jordan Neely, who later died from compression of the neck. Neely never got physical with anyone on the train before being put in the chokehold. Penny has been charged with manslaughter, and his attorneys say he acted in self-defense. Several Republican presidential candidates have come to Penny's defense. During a press conference, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis praised Penny for his actions.
I think that that's something that was the right thing to do, and I don't think he should be prosecuted. I think you have a prosecutor there that sides with the criminal element over law-abiding citizens. And
biotech entrepreneur Vivek Ramaswamy donated $10,000 to Penny's legal defense fund. And former United Nations Ambassador Nikki Haley called for Penny's pardon in her defense of the Marine vet over the weekend.
This was a man trying to save other Americans. We should be thanking him. It is unfortunate what happened, but thank God he was there because more people could have been hurt. And that's why I think the governor needs to say, we are not going to charge him. I will pardon him if he's charged because that's the right thing to do.
The incident with Penny does harken back to several times in the past when Republicans have vigorously defended veterans and others who have killed people in argued self-defense cases. These defenses came during times of increased unrest due to racial injustice. Then President Donald Trump and other top Republicans did fiercely support Kyle Rittenhouse during the 2020 presidential election. Rittenhouse killed 2 men and wounded a third during a tumultuous night of protests in Wisconsin over a black man's death. He was later acquitted. And just weeks ago, Texas Republican Governor Greg Abbott vowed to pardon a white Army sergeant who fatally shot an armed man during a 2020 Black Lives Matter protest in Austin. Army Sergeant Daniel Perry was sentenced to 25 years in prison. We will continue to bring you updates to the trial as it unfolds. In other news, differing accounts are coming out of Ukraine about the contested city of Bakhmut. For more on this, freelance journalist Tom Much sat down with me to discuss the developments in the besieged Ukrainian city. Tom Much, a freelance journalist currently in Ukraine, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Tom, there has been some discussion about what is actually the situation on the ground in Bakhmut. Russia is saying the city's completely fallen. Ukraine saying no, that it hasn't completely fallen, that it's in prime position for a spring/soon-to-be summer counteroffensive. So what's currently the situation on the ground in Bakhmut, based on what you're hearing and your reporting?
So it's impossible to know for sure at the moment. And remember that a lot of what Russians or Ukrainians can say, whether regular or irregular troops like Wagner will say, can be psychological misdirection and misinformation and sort of info warfare. But it seems that Russia have control of, if not all of the city of Bakhmut, then the vast, vast majority of it. It's possible that Ukraine still has a foothold in one or two houses on the outskirts, but if they do, that won't last very much longer. However, what the Ukrainian High Command is also saying is that they are in the process of taking back a lot of territory around Bakhmut. So not inside the city itself, but on the northern and southern flanks. Now, there is some suggestion that they might want to do something a little bit like what happened in Stalingrad, effectively trap all of the Russian soldiers inside the city with intense urban combat, and then go round and encircle them in the city and cut them off and force them to surrender. Now, whether Ukraine has the combat power to force that through, or whether it wants to spare all of its new weaponry on brigades on encircling the Russians in Bakhmut, is an open question, and one that we'll probably find out over the next couple of weeks.
What is the strategic or, I guess, psychological significance of Bakhmut? From what I've heard, it's not a big mountaintop or some geographically strategic city. So why are the Russians putting so much emphasis and attention on Bakhmut?
So it was sort of in some ways just a geographical quirk of fate that Bakhmut was the next town along in the Donbass that the Russians needed to take in order to take the whole region. They took the Luhansk cities of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk relatively easily in comparison. This was before Ukraine had mobilized much of its manpower. It was before Ukraine had received a lot of the shipments of US weaponry. So they weren't in as good a state to defend when they were defending those cities. Now, Bakhmut was when Ukraine started to achieve about combat power parity with the Russian forces, putting it in a much better position to hold them off. Yes, Bakhmut is in the way of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk, Ukraine's two major strongholds still remaining in the Donbass region. But in a way, I think the amount of blood and treasure both sides poured into Bakhmut effectively made it a strategically important city by that fact alone, whether it necessarily has a great geographical position or not. There were a lot of people saying that actually Ukraine should have pulled back, but possibly back to the city of Chasiv Yar, which is quite nearby. That's on more of an elevation and it might be easier to defend. But there was also the political significance. Of course, one of the reasons that Ukraine was provided so much weaponry was because it proved that it could take back serious amounts of territory, first in Kiev, then in Kharkiv, and lastly in Kherson. So Ukraine definitely did not want to look like it was on the back foot. It wanted to project an image of power to the world, that it wasn't going to lose any more territory. And I think by and large it did that. Remember, the Russians spent 10 months to conquer a city that's, they made probably about 30 kilometers worth of gains in about 9 or 10 months to conquer a city of 70,000 people. So more or less, I think Bakhmut served its purpose in attriting the Russian forces down. Now, whether it did that to enough extent for Ukraine to take back large amounts of territory in the south, as they want to do in this upcoming counteroffensive, still remains to be seen. So I think the jury's out on whether Ukraine investing so much resources and so many soldiers into the meat grinder of Bakhmut, we won't know for a while.
Definitely, and a lot of emphasis has just been placed on this one town in this one region of the far east of Ukraine. So, are there any other developments happening around other lines of battle that you think listeners should know about?
So the Russians didn't just attack in Bakhmut, they also attacked in other regions of the Donbass front line. They attacked north in the Kremenna-Svatove direction towards Liman. They attacked south of Bakhmut in the directions of Vuhledar and Avdiivka. But in almost all of these directions, they've made next to no progress, and they've suffered huge casualties for very, very little appreciable gains. We're talking maybe a few miles of forest here and there, certainly no major settlement. Bakhmut was the only place, and it may have been because of the tactics of the Wagner group, that they were able to make some significant progress. Other than that, the front has been relatively quiet. Quiet in the sense that there's been no serious movement. The Zaporizhia and Kherson front lines haven't moved since the Ukrainians took back the city of Kherson in November last year. There's not much movement on the Kharkiv front. Then again, there is this shock development today that it seems a Ukrainian raiding force entered the Russian territory of Belgorod and actually managed to capture a reasonable amount of territory there now. That was probably just a raid that they will pull back from, but it shows you that the Ukrainians can be capable of quite some creative strikes, and it also must put a lot of pressure on Russian forces who now have to worry about defending their northern border, and it could well be a distraction from Ukraine's main focus of attack, which no one knows where that will be, but most people think it will be in the south, in the Zaporizhia region.
Tom Much, first time ever on the podcast. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me. Hopefully not the last time.
For more conversations like that one, please like and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. Also on the radar for today, the Department of Veterans Affairs added 300,000 new names to its online registry of deceased veterans and service members buried at national cemeteries around the country. The Veterans Legacy Memorial Project is designed to let the American public learn more about those who served in the military, even when they can't visit their grave sites. It also gives family and friends another way to carry on their memory through online stories and tributes. The addition of the new names brings the total number featured in the project to nearly 5 million. The online registry includes the basic military service records of the deceased, the location of their final resting place, and directions on how to visit. Family members can also submit photos, award citations, and other historic documents to be included in the listings. The new group includes tens of thousands of individuals interned at Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia. Although many veterans are buried there, the site is managed by Army officials, not the VA. Department officials will host Memorial Day ceremonies at more than 130 national cemeteries this weekend to commemorate the holiday. VA Secretary Dennis McDonough is expected to preside over a wreath-laying ceremony at B.G. William C. Doyle Veterans Memorial Cemetery in New Jersey on Saturday. All national cemeteries run by the department will be open throughout Memorial Day weekend, from dawn to dusk, to allow visitors access to the sites. And now, here are some other stories that we're hearing chirps about. Defense News is reporting that Air Force Secretary Frank Kendall said that training Ukraine pilots on F-16s is the first step to sending fighter jets to the country. But he remains skeptical that such equipment would change the state of the war. Marine Corps Times is reporting that 180 Marines and 110 civilians at Marine Corps Base Quantico, Virginia, are preparing for a simulated emergency train derailment exercise. And Stars and Stripes reported that ashes from a volcanic eruption near Sicily over the weekend scattered ashes across a U.S. Navy base. Naval Air Station Sigonella temporarily closed its runway over the weekend. And on this day in history, in 1900, Army Sergeant William Carney became the first black service member to be awarded the Medal of Honor. Carney was born a slave in 1840, and he enlisted in the Union Army after his family moved to Massachusetts. It was unclear whether his family was freed or they escaped. He would end up sustaining numerous gunshot wounds while catching the American flag in the middle of battle, after the flag bearer was hit by a number of bullets. Carney caught the flag before it ever hit the ground. That's it for us this morning. To get more top stories and breaking news, go to defensenews.com/EBB to subscribe to the Early Bird Brief newsletter. If you liked what you heard, give us a like wherever you get your podcasts. And be sure to follow us on social media at defense_news and at Military Times. Also, please rate us and be sure to leave a comment. Today's Early Bird Brief is hosted and produced by me, Zimone Z. Perez. Today's episode features stories by the Associated Press, Tom Much, and Leo Shane III. Our editor-in-chief is Mike Bruce. Have a great day.